USACE as well, 2 years as community planner with USACE. Prior to that, I was with NAVFAC for about 4 years, working with North IPP and then Naval Submarine Base in London. So it's my experience in the government side.
Well, I'll go ahead and go through the rest of the team, just to give you an idea of what the staffing is like. We have 5 planners, 2 GIS specialists, and a charrette team lead that does coordination and work with our engineering staff to do in-house charrettes, supporting the local installations with doing their work. So we have a diverse background of staff, all experienced and credentialed within their field of expertise. I believe many of you had the opportunity to work with most of us, but this is our team that supports all of the plans. So I'll turn it over to Ed to do an introduction of himself and kind of give his initial thoughts.
Good morning, everybody, or I should say almost good afternoon. I'm Ed Gauvreau, and for the last about 10, 12 years, I've been the chief of the planning branch here at headquarters within the Installation Readiness Division. Basically, I oversee all the initial planning at the very left side of the whole facility life cycle. I've got both the master planning function, the PACS program manager for 1391s, and then also our combat readiness support team, which does a lot of work in terms of developing Army standards and Army standard designs. So you can read the rest of my bio in there. We have a very large program, maybe not as large as MILCON, but as I tell the folks at headquarters, if it wasn't for us, there wouldn't be a MILCON program. So, and I'm just going to turn it back over to Shenita.
Thanks, Ed. So I want to start with just kind of a more in-depth look at what are our lines of effort in master planning, what types of work are we doing, what are our programs elements. So we do have 4 major lines of effort. That includes the master planning, programming, facility and asset management, and geospatial services. On this chart, I've bolded elements that we are really keen on doing and focus a lot of our current work. So we do have lots of projects and work over the last few years in vision planning, installation development plans, area development plans, installation energy and water plans over the last couple of years. Previously, before that, it was the net zero energy studies. For our programming, that goes into the basis of requirements analysis, planning charrettes, developing the programming support documents in DD 1391s or customer concept documents, as well as the area development execution plan, which is that next step of developing that capital investment strategy. For facility asset management, you probably have done the work with the space utilization studies, infrastructure studies, such as water and sewer, builder, filter, e-prisms, transportation studies, and facility space planning and optimization, which we've been doing a lot of for support of the Air Force. And for geospatial services, a lot of remote sensing, LiDAR, GIS support, helping the garrisons update their data and their information, doing trend analysis, mapping, as well as the GIS data collection and consolidation for the different garrisons. So these are all the work that you guys are supporting us in doing. We've included a reference of the installation master planning UFC. It guides a lot of the work that we're doing. So that reference has been a key element in our scopes and in the processes that we're performing the work that we're doing. So I wanted to start through going just kind of a high level look at what the trends are in the work and some of the things that we're experiencing. And as Margaret alluded to at the beginning, this is a kind of a time where we could have some interchange and engagement. But one of the things we wanted to share is currently we see more requests for higher level planning or strategic planning. So we're doing theater and infrastructure plans, theater posture studies, analysis of alternatives. I know many of you are following some of the decisions that come from higher leadership in government. So from the president to our Secretary of Defense, and how that trickles down to how the units and garrisons and operations are going to function, what changes are going to happen. Just like a lot of information started from the discussion or the idea of UCOM moving their headquarters. So that spurs, well, where do we exist now? How do we plan for that type of move? What are those requirements? And we're assisting in finding those answers and asking more questions and getting the data. So that's leading to more of the strategic plan and posturing, and as well as the change of the overall campaign plans, the strategic plans as we change from one administration to the next. So that was a key element that's come up in the last year or two, as well as comprehensive long-range planning. Most of the stakeholders that we've engaged with are really seeing the value in thinking ahead. We've been promoting, making sure that we do long-range planning and master planning according to UFC. So we've had quite a few area development plans, including not just for the garrisons, but in the host nation areas that we're doing work. So we have them all across Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. We have quite a few. And now we're even getting to the point where some of those are requiring updates. A long range plan, development plans for for the Air Force and a lot of the air bases. We did complete about 12 of those recently. We're adding some new ones. We're looking at updating some of the ones that have been completed. Utility master plans, especially at understanding what are the changes for all of this new development that's planning. How do we upgrade the utility infrastructure to be able to support all of this new requirements at various garrisons, as well as utility surveys, because some of the information is fragmented. We need to know exactly what's existing. So we've done quite a bit of mapping and updating the GIS information to support those efforts. As facility optimization and facility use planning, better using the facilities that they currently have. We all know some of the, restrictions and limitations with the MILCOM programming and the funding that they have for SRM. So we're looking at ways to better utilize the facilities that they currently have and what improvements we can make before moving into that next step of going into MILCOM. And then in programming, our programming, one of the areas where we saw a weakness over the last years is actually getting that initial design basis threat analysis completed. So we have all of the requirements for what that anti-terrorism, force protection requirements, does that affect how the building will be sited, how the building will be constructed, as far as is there any additional requirements to the exterior that needs to be considered at the planning stage, so that we have funding to appropriately design when we move into that next phase. So some of the trends, some of the actions that we've kind of seen as being highlighted and brought to the forefront over the last year or 2 years.
Hey, Shenita, this is Margaret. Before we go on to any sort of discussion of these trends, again, not everyone in here has a planning background, and while they are associated with military engineering, and some of these things are pretty self-evident, there's a couple that probably people could use some more definition on, and I'm thinking about perhaps theater posture plans and also the long-range development plans. Could you go a little bit into more detail about what makes those different from other master planning products?
So in the theater posture plan, we're really taking a step back at higher level looks and really taking a look at what's their posture vision for ahead. Is that, their 2035 or 2040, a long range look at their posture and how they want to be situated within the theater. So what units they plan to have, what capabilities they're looking to support, and looking at the combined I guess, capabilities, not just of what USACE, what the U.S. Army or U.S. government has, but how do we integrate that with what the host nation has at this particular time, as well as our NATO partner or the NATO alliance. So it's really taking a broader step back and then determining what are the gaps between where we need to be and what we currently have, and outlining those projects. And then we can move into the next step of how do we plan for those particular areas that were defined. So you're looking at the entire theater, and then the next step would be, well, at that particular area, let's do some additional planning. And then at a particular project or capability, then we'll do some additional planning. So it's really a high level look at capacity and capability. Anything that I missed there?
You covered that part very well. And then you want to do long range development.
You wanna take it?
Sure, I can take long range development plan. So kind of like Shenita was talking about, this is taking a long range look at what an installation or what an installation capabilities are currently and where they want to go, what's their vision for what capabilities they would like to have in the future. And that can be, depending on the type of installation, that could be military infrastructure, but it can also be base support kind of infrastructure as well. So let's say they want to increase the amount of family members that are going to be accompanying a service member. And so we would need to account for increased housing on an installation, or maybe we need to expand the airfield because we have a different type of aircraft coming in the future. So these are all the long range development plan type pieces that need to be cited, thought through, to see what the what are the consequences for putting more housing, what are the outcomes of increasing the airfield, what other second, third order effects do we need to account for on that installation master plan? And then laying that out in sequence, coming up with some kind of cost estimate, and then that sets the stage for us to be able to go into the actual programming effort following that. So.
And it notes that the long range development plans are for the Air Force. Does the Army have something comparable?
So they're really still both master planning and long range planning. The reason why it's just kind of titled long range development plans for the Air Force is they had a little bit of a unique perspective and requirements from Army. And so as we were applying the UFC for Army installation master planning, we had to account for some of the requirements and changes to the Air Force. But they're basically both area development plans and long range development plans still both cover a 20-year plan, establishes a vision, and walks through the same process. So the requirements and the information is the same as far as the structure of the product.
Thanks.
Any other questions or discussion about trends from anyone? Yeah. Speak up, guys.
They'll start calling on you eventually.
There you go. Well, I know most of the community are have our engineer and planning support. So wanted to share some of the graphs and actual data from the work that we've accomplished over the last few years. So I'm going to share some graphs and charts from our 2018, 2019, 2020 work, and then just what we're doing currently for FY21. So first, for each of the slides, we'll go through kind of the dollar values of projects by the 4 lines of effort that I've mentioned or kind of explained. And here, so we had about 14 million in master planning, 2.5 for facility and asset management, 11 for geospatial services, and 12 for programming. And this gave us a total program value of master planning support of $39.6 million for 2018. For 2018, we had products, 166 products. And these are kind of the breakdown of the product by product line. So 77 with our programming, 32 for geospatial, 6 for our facility and asset management, and then the remainder for master planning. So those long range and area development plan type projects.
So Shenita, each of those products, those were the ones that you had in the bigger chart earlier. So
Yes.
that might be an area development plan and
Installation development plan.
Gotcha.
So that mix of that type of product in that list, that's the number of those that we developed.
Thank you.
And so we wanted to kind of show you also who are we doing work for by category. So of course we're supporting the Army, well, that was 57% of the work. Air Force was 10%. GIS was 19%. Most of the GIS at that time was all Army. That trend has become, now we're doing more Air Force geospatial support. You'll see that. And our in-house work was 14% of that work, which most of the in-house work is also Army. So for 2019, you see there was an increase in dollar value by $4.2 million of work from the previous year. And that also coincides with the actual, you'll see on the next slide, a decrease in the number of projects. But here the percentage breakdown is relatively the same. We still have 14.4 million in master planning, 3.4 in the facility asset management, 15 in geospatial services, and 10 million in programming. To see that we had a reduction in the number of projects. So a lot of the work that was seen, even though there was a decrease from 166 to 140 projects, the size of the projects increased. So maybe it was the number of products requested in a single action, or basically just the size of, whether we're doing one area or 3 area development plans for one site. So that kind of reflects some of the change. Even though we're doing less task orders and less projects, we're doing more work in that year. And so that breakdown, so pretty much close. Army was still 39% of the work. We had a definite increase in work that we were supporting in the Air Force, so that increased to 25%. Our in-house work is at 11%, so relatively stable, and our GIS work is also increasing to 25%. For FY20, we had a slight decrease in overall program to 41 million. That breakdown is still master planning at 9 million. So now that there have been quite a bit of the master planning done, there's a decrease in doing those and are just doing updates in FY20. 3.8 in facility asset management, 14 in the geospatial services, and 13 in the programming. So relatively stable the year before. The total number of projects were 145, and that split was 36 were master planning, 58 was programming, and so that followed on from the previous year doing a lot of the long-range development planning, and then following it up with doing the next step of development, which is the programming. Facility asset management at 16, and GIS at 35 projects. And so that percent still master planning leading, I mean, Army still leading. We did have increase in the GIS support. That was adding the support to the Air Force. So still maintaining all of our Army GIS and mapping and surveying, but increasing my providing now support into the UK for the Air Force as well. And our still doing our regular programming planning for Air Force at 18% and in-house at 8%. So what are we doing currently? How has that changed? We're still at 33% of the work is for Army. That GIS work that I mentioned is at 41%. In-house at 8% and Air Force at 18%. So this is all the current workload that we have, who are we doing work for? And the next slide, we're going to show where are we working.
Shenita, I have a question about that. That percentage of workload, is that by the dollar value or by the number of projects?
It's by the number of projects. So for each of those graphs, it's each one of those is by the number of projects for that particular customer.
Of course, a small project sometimes takes just as much effort as a large one. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as you can see, Germany is still our hub of operations. So most of the projects are in Germany. That's 64% of the work. And the next percent you'll see is the major increase from previous years is work with the United Kingdom. So work for the Air Force in the UK, which is the next largest chunk, which is 8%. And then we have, of course, things that have grown is work in Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Croatia. That all sit around 4 or 5% of the work. Now I'll turn it over to Kurt to lead us through some of the planning challenges.
We're gonna do this.
Okay, he's gonna
yeah,
lead,
well, I'll
and then we're
lead.
all gonna
This is all,
support.
I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, Nathan, feel free to weigh in here. I think this really more is where I have anything that stimulates any questions on your part here. You know, particular examples that come to mind. I'm not gonna read these verbatim, but yeah, and I was thinking more speaking along the lines of lessons learned to my points, but you know, if anything here spurs any thoughts on your part, welcome to have that dialogue. We want to hear from you as well. I'm not here to just tell you what.
If I could just ask a question, maybe, and just get your takes on, you know, what your experiences were doing virtual charrettes, how well you thought those were compared to a traditional, you know, charrette process. You know, it's had many challenges on both sides with our customers as well. So just get your thoughts and impressions of that.
Okay, Mike, you're pretty far from the speaker. Margaret, were you able to hear the question okay?
No, it was a little muffled.
Okay,
If you could repeat it would be good.
so Mike, do you want to repeat it? Just come up here, or do you want to repeat the question?
I'll repeat the
Yes, okay,
question.
thank you.
So the question was related to getting insights on our experience with doing the virtual charrettes and process. We did try to continue moving forward with a lot of our program by doing hybrid and virtual charrettes, both in-house as well as with our AE partners. And there's been a mix of experiences. Early on, I think the challenge was really getting the customers to be prepared and engaged. So we had to take a step and start doing a few more calls prior to the actual charrette, to make sure that they're prepared, provide even, in some cases, we provide them questionnaires or interview documents prior to the actual charrette, so that they would come with information, because most of the The progress that happens is whether we get the right information during the shreds. That's the entire, that's the entire point. The product that comes out of it is all dependent upon the customers and stakeholders being prepared with their requirements, being able to answer any additional questions. And so when we really engage them and provide them those steps prior to the virtual charrette, it was very beneficial, and I think things went a little bit smoother.
Shenita, do you, on the scale, do you think over the last 18 months, how good have we gotten doing that, or is there still a ways to go?
In my experience, I think it's gotten quite better. I think people have adjusted to the virtual environment, and I think there was an initial shock of not really being there. And how do we? Because when you're on site, if someone doesn't show up, you can always walk to their office and have a separate meeting. Well, you can't do that virtually. You have to really time that schedule and make sure that everyone knows when is their time slot. So I think as it transitioned from the very beginning to the end, everyone was a little more used to working virtual, was a little more patient. Technology changed over the course of that time. So leveraging some of the different teaming environments, doing things a little more collaboratively, breaking down the workshops to 4-hour increments versus doing an 8-hour increment and spreading it out over a week and a half versus cramming it all into a week. I think it gave a little more flexibility in how things operated and made things work a little bit better. So I think it was a learning progress that kind of has its ups and downs over the year, but I think there was definitely some advancement there.
Nathan
Agree,
and
yeah.
Kurt, do you agree? You have a different opinion?
I agree. And I would just add that I think in some cases we got better participation doing it virtually because we had folks maybe from different organizations that may not have typically shown up and or have had the capability to travel to an on-site charrette. So in some cases, we were a little overwhelmed with the number of people that were participating, but I would say that's a good thing. So, yeah, Steve.
So given that information, the lessons we've learned, do you anticipate going forward, going back to fully in person, or maybe it will be a hybrid model? What do you intend on doing if you talk about that?
And Nathan, if you could just repeat that question so everybody can hear it, please.
Yeah. If you have a question in the room here, either come over here or speak really loud. Yeah. Thank you.
So the question was, what do we see going forward? Are we going to kind of continue to do virtual, or is it going to be more hybrid, or are we just going to say we're not doing virtual anymore? We're just going to kind of in person. I mean, I think that's the gist of what we're exploring here. So we've talked about it. I think we're kind of in that period now where it's kind of a hybrid, as we're experiencing just in this particular event right here. Some people are comfortable coming into an in-person meeting. Some people still are not. And so that's also a consideration in all of these events. I think certain things lend themselves better to doing virtual than others. Like I wouldn't particularly like to do an ADP, an area development plan, virtually. That certainly is something that is better suited for in person. There's definitely a lot of collaboration, looking around a map, looking at coming up with a vision and doing the visioning, the goals and the objectives, and coming up with a course of action. That's very challenging virtually. So I don't foresee that one being a virtual one that we would push ever. Maybe someone has a different opinion, but
No, I agree.
yeah, requirements analysis, I would say that's something that we could do virtually. A lot of times it's just an interview. So it's a series of interviews with people. And sometimes they don't even show up at the actual event on site. So we end up having to call them after the fact anyway. So, in this case, maybe it's something very appropriate for a virtual event. And then something in between. So planning charrette side, depends. Maybe we do some virtual stuff at the beginning and then come up with a concept for what we're looking at for the facility, and then get on site and do the charrette and talk about, look at the map, look at the floor plan, kind of pick it apart, see what, what works, what doesn't. Maybe there was somebody we didn't engage before and we can engage in person. So another option maybe thought about. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to answer your question, Mike, I mean, for all the projects I worked on, this past virtual year, most of them were 1391, PCR efforts. And, they were done virtually for the most part, some were hybrid. I thought the community did an excellent job. It really delivered. And yeah, there was some issues with timing, we do this in 4-hour increments, it's just being cognizant of people that are, being in front of the computer screen for X amount of time and trying to focus. So, but I agree with Nathan as far as, some of the more traditional planning, ADPs, LRDPs, or, those type of efforts, I think are really best served in person. I think kind of be the way forward. I haven't heard anything from customers moving forward, aside from, let's be prepared for hybrid, scenarios with the intent that we really want to do in person. So, that's, I think kind of, the way forward is kind of be flexible there. It can be set up. Something like that.
I think that's really going to be the key. What he said is really being flexible, making sure that we establish, expectations and kind of communicate between stakeholders and the full project delivery team, make sure that the best path for that particular project is set.
Now,
We
before
have-
we leave that topic, Ed Gauvreau had some input. Do you want to just go ahead and explain your input, Ed?
Sure, why not? First of all, of course, as you see in the chat, I had 3 things. One is about small projects. There really is no such thing as a small project, especially if the flag officer is very interested in it. Then it's definitely not a small project. It is very large in their perspective. Regarding in terms of doing charrettes, ADPs, and all that, I see short term we're still going to be hybrid model. It's it's just going to depend on the location. It's going to depend on what the health protection level is at any particular place and the travel restrictions. I know in a lot of places they're loosening up, but in other places they're tightening up again. So there's going to be a lot of play it by ear. Long term, I think certainly we all want to go back to in person because it's that personal interaction between people that I think is extremely important, regardless of the product you're looking at. But I think also the fact is we want to have that virtual participation component in there so that folks can participate if they can't be there in person. I think that's very important. On planning charrettes, I can't emphasize enough the fact is that I would like to have all the players there when you start doing it. I mean, even if you do the interviews afterwards, the thing is that it's good to have folks because then you can start trying to deconflict what people think need to be in the facility. Because like I said, if it gets missed during the planning charrettes and you do 1391, once it goes to Congress, you're pretty much stuck with it. Because if you ask to basically do an above threshold reprogramming or any other change, they tend to give you the evil eye and a few other things. So it's like I said, in terms of planning charrettes, I can't emphasize enough that we need to have, I would even say it's even more important than an ADP that you need to have the folks there, because if you miss a requirement there, it's hard to get it in later on. And that's all I've got for now. Over.
Thanks, Ed. Charisse, you were going to say something?
I see we've got a hand raised from Ken Cost.
Ken?
Thank you.
Feel free to
Thanks.
turn your camera on, Ken, if you want.
No, it's early here and I'm
Okay.
not camera ready. But, thank you so far for the presentation. It's very good. Can I just take us back? I hate to do this, but back one section to the workload. And I was wondering if you had any kind of crystal ball as to what 2022 would look like, because we're really almost in 2022. And, is it going to be a similar trend to what we saw in 21, or do you see other areas maybe taking precedent? Thank you.
In your question, are you asking more specifically about where we're working or the dollar value? I mean, I guess I can just answer both.
Yeah, thank you.
Area wise, I still see the trend where we're working kind of staying the same. We do have a couple of new areas that we'll have work in, but that's still going to end up being, 1% of the work. But most of the work still in Germany, still high level, maybe even more increase of work in the UK by a number of projects as well as dollar value. But where we're working, I see that trend still continuing on the path that it's going. The dollar value and the number of projects, I expect the dollar value to still be somewhat the same, but the number of projects will still be decreasing. So and I think the AE community has seen this trend of the task orders or the projects themselves being a little more comprehensive, having both area development planning and programming in them, or having a full holistic plan for that particular garrison or installation. We're trying to do that to be a little more consistent with the projects for that garrison, including which AE is doing their work at a particular time and which PM they're working with at a particular time. So I think that's the trend that you're going to see in 2022.
Shenita, one question of clarification is I know like, for instance, in the firm that I work, we've seen one contract that had 11, LRDPs at different locations. So I'm wondering, the question is that one project or is that 11 projects as you chart these?
By contract, that's one project. One of the things that we did do in 2020, so a lot of this data comes from our annual reporting that we do to provide to headquarters. So we did spend a lot of time actually going through in 2020, which we didn't do in the years before, but identifying each product. So we have both information in the trends now, and I assume that we'll keep that information as we're reporting the next year. Previously, we just reported it as one project. We didn't really break out how many products were being done in that particular contract or project. But we are trying to get more fidelity in information. So last year, we did break it down for that particular project. If it was a mix of long-range planning or master planning and programming, we did break that out into separate line items and the cost, so that we knew the split between that one project, what was the cost for the master planning there, what was the cost for the programming, and if there was any GIS work attached to it. Because we do have a project, particularly for UK, that is comprehensive, that has master planning, programming, and GIS, and facility space optimization, where it's all under one project. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks.
Shenita, I'm going to interject here a little bit. First of all, I will plead guilty for basically asking the regional centers to be a bit more granular in terms of the data, in terms of projects that they're doing. Yeah, I see, at least in terms of your prevailing trends, is that it's interesting that we saw overall across the enterprise that facility and asset management was actually the largest component we did last year. And it was a big change from 2019. So, and a lot of that was going to be builder implementation. And then, of course, it was programming, and then actual planning was like third, and then GIS fourth. But I do say the fact is we anticipate that GIS work is going to become an increasing part of the portfolio. So I expect that that's going to expand tremendously. But again, also it depends is that in terms of what Shenita is doing in Europe, of course, they have a different mix of stakeholders and programs than we may have elsewhere across the world. But otherwise, it's a good breakdown. And like I said, I'll plead guilty to forcing the centers that, hey, we're looking for a bit more information so we can start making better decisions across the enterprise. Over.
Thank you, Ed. Now, Lindsay, you had a question, and then Dave or Mike. Okay, so Lindsay.
I just wanted to provide a little feedback from the execution side on the hybrid event. From our team, I think one of the challenges one of the benefits of being in person is that the team is there, the AE team is there and fully dedicated to that effort. When everyone is calling in virtually, just by the nature, you get dragged into other items across other projects. And so I think that in-person dedication, everyone has the same mission, had a little bit better continuity in terms of being able to provide the product. And so that was something, just feedback from our side, that we've had to navigate and work through in order to have tunnel vision and put our blinders on to make sure we're in it full force as a team.
Yeah. I'll put in a quick plug for the SAME International Community of Interest. We did a panel discussion at JETSI where we talked about the state of play of virtual charrettes, and we got government input and AE industry input. And that is recorded if anyone is interested in going back, because I think we both say the same thing, but our experience is a little bit different. So, all right, Mike, you had a next question?
Just real quick, I was wondering about the impact of the trend of EDI funding and how that impacts you guys. Well, it sounds like increasing, Air Force and UK work, probably overall decrease in EDI funding. How does that affect you, or does it affect you, what you're doing in your focus?
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was, how does EDI funding affect our program or the work that we're doing? So there's still EDI funding some of that is decreasing, but some of them are finding ways to apply projects to the EDI program and the EDI funding. So we're still getting those projects. There are less than I would say in the previous years, but there's also a new focus. So we have work that's related to more of a strategic focus as well. So it's kind of been a balance.
Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. Ed mentioned that the part of the portfolio last year, that the asset management portion was the biggest part of the overall headquarters portfolio, and locally here it was one of the smallest. Do you see that as a continuing trend where that's contracted through headquarters and actioned locally versus actioning it locally?
So for, I'm not gonna ask about contract. I'll let Ed.
All right, I'll answer the question. The most of the fact that asset management was the implementation of Builder across the Army. As you know, Builder is the system of record for DoD. Our Army counterparts have been the last to adopt, and they have now accelerated their not only their fielding but their implementation, and we're now looking at the sustainment piece. So I anticipate the fact is that we will be that will continue. Also, the fact is that, and I'll talk a little bit more about another initiative that we're looking where we're hoping to take that Builder data and integrate it into a larger entity, but more to follow on that. But in terms of the contracting, Mobile District is the national program manager for Builder for IMCOM. So as far as for implementation within Europe, I'm a little foggy on that one. But so IMCOM would be doing for the Army. In terms of for the Air Force, I'd have to get back to you on that. But more to follow. Over. Go ahead.
implemented here. So you don't find the cost values in my data because it's contracted through the Mobile district. But our district is doing the project management work for the builder work that is in Europe. So right now there's projects across all of Germany and Italy as well. And so we're working with Mobile as project managers to execute the work, but we're not the contracting officers of the work. So I didn't include the cost of that work being performed here in my portfolio, because I assume that that's being reported and percent pushed up to headquarters in their reporting.
Yeah, maybe you need another little wedge in your eye.
Work by others.
Work by
So we
others.
do track work by others, but I don't report it in my data as cost for our project.
Thank you for the clarification.
So some slides, I think, if you want.
Should we move on?
Well, can we go back to the other side? I think we talked through most of these issues. You know, we talked through collaboration and teaming. One of the things we didn't talk about that we really tried to focus on was really connecting the master plans that exist at the installations with the programming work that we're doing. We want to make sure that they're in line with, you know, the regulating plan, with, you know, the capacity plans that's there. We don't want to do programming that creates problems for the master plans that we've already developed. And we're also integrating our programming with our design. So bringing in design PMs in the programming stage, so that as they move to design, they're getting a lot of that information relayed. And they've even, in some cases, we've participated in those design threads to do that handover, crossover information. We really want to make sure that that's streamlined and we're doing good programming, good planning, programming, and design. I think we've talked through the others, including defining customer requirements. That has been really a challenge as they are changing how their makeup is. We have new formations of units. They don't quite understand what those new units are, or how they operate. So we're creating those, we're helping them create and develop those requirements. So it's very important for our AE partners to come in with some knowledge of how certain units operate. It's usually a mix of existing units that are becoming this new entity. And so sometimes we have to do a little bit of work to help them get to an answer so that we have the information to do our jobs. So I think those things are really important.
Sure. So again, I mean, this is kind of a Q&A opportunity. I want to hear from you as well, like where the government, you know, can be helping in this process. A couple of these bullet points of I'll take credit for, as far as the just lessons learned in our virtual realm this past year, and you know, moving forward, even not virtual, thinking about as we get into deliverable review, and you know, there's questions that come up, and often we, you know, we get a meeting invite. Maybe it's not strategically aligned with our, you know, this is when our government review teleconference is. You know, we need to have a meeting with government stakeholders, and there really isn't anything to work from based on that invitation. It's just kind of like we're having a meeting to discuss blank. And I kind of learned it probably would be beneficial that for the AE community to help the government as far as trying to make these meetings more efficient, is be prepared to propose solutions, knowing kind of what the dynamic project. It'll help, I think, the government, and they do need to talk to each other with, you know, with the customer and USACE, you know, various entities, be able to, you know, kind of focus on what they need to address. So I found that might be advantageous, thinking about that in your project management perspective. Yeah, and this one, yeah, the bottom one about being mindful of time and, proposing an impromptu conference call. Where there's a line of, what's information versus discussion. And, does this require a discussion with government, or can we just put this in an email? So just being sensitive to that, thought process, I guess, would be helpful, because I think I have definitely encountered where I've had meetings where, virtually, there's impromptu ones, like, why do we have this? It's really, what was the point of this? So I'm speaking in generalities here. I don't want to get into real specifics of particular scenarios, but, just trying to, just encourage proactivity and propose solutions as you move forward. Will help greatly. Anyone else, questions or comments, the rest of the team?
I'll give a specific example. As we're we talked about the transition back to in-person meeting and hybrid meetings. One of the things that came out of a recent, we just traveling around into Germany and doing some Army family housing work. And one of the things that came out of it is really, prior to being there, we usually develop an agenda. Sometimes the agendas have just general blocks. We want to do interviews at this time. We want to do interviews at this time. But it doesn't define specific time slots for individuals. I want to see environmental at 10 o'clock, ATFP at 11 o'clock. One of the trends has been over that time is that we've gotten a little more general in our agendas. And we like to see that get a little more specific, because then you're not getting there and then trying to adjust someone's schedule. You already have that time locked in for that discussion. And then you don't have to keep shifting to see, is it possible that we're going to meet everyone in this time frame? Because you would have already had that scheduled for all of the elements that you need to talk to while you're there. So that was definitely a lesson learned. We spent a lot of time running around back and forth between people offices, waiting for them to have time to talk to us because they weren't available in the general slot. Or we had 3 people show up and had to try to talk to all 3 of them.
That's a fair
Which-
ask. That's fair.
Or they just had to hear the spill a couple of different times.
Yeah.
So I think that's one specific example for timing. Any
I don't have anything about that particular topic.
any other things from your lessons learned?
Question?
So in terms of working in a lot of these smaller countries or whatever, you see a need, historically not so much, but you see need going forward where there'll be need to translate documents, that information in language.
In some of the projects, we've included that, mostly for the projects in the Poland area. One of the things that we did find is usually their highly technical people are maybe not so experienced with the English language. So when we were wanting to talk with the engineers or provide them information, we wanted to have that translated. And I think we include that in Ukraine and maybe some of the other smaller countries. As far as the installation support branch, we do have a translator on our staff. I think that's more limited to Polish, German, and French. But we'll have to look at what are the requirements for that particular area. If we still need to do more translation. But I can see that being the case for those smaller countries.
Any other thoughts?
Okay, I guess I'm up. So, all right, Before I start on my stuff, I mean, admittedly, it's only three words, but there are a lot of stuff in there. But I do want to answer a couple of questions that I've gotten over the last few months. Where is Jerry Zeckert, and who's taken his place? As you may have known, Jerry was the longtime face of master planning, did a lot of great stuff in laying the foundation for where we are now. Jerry took retirement last October after 39 years of federal service. He is back. He's home in Fredericksburg, Virginia, doing lots of other great stuff and finding that there is life after the Corps of Engineers. That being said, over the past year, I've been able to put a couple new members on my team. One is Randy Covington, who has worked both in the public and private sectors, has a great deal of experience with IMCOM, as well as with R South, and then also was with U.S. Army Japan, which is where I stole him from. And the newest addition earlier this year is April Gray. She is an architect as well as a planner. She had about 10 plus years with the Air Force. I hired her away from AFCEC, and together they have been quite a formidable force in looking in terms of where we're taking the overall direction of planning within the Corps and beyond. On that, I'm going to talk about off of these 3 points. These 3 words are basically the 3 main initiatives that we're looking at from headquarters in terms of where we're pursuing, at least for the next year. Education. We have the prospect curriculum of master planning courses, 8 courses, which go all the way from principles all the way to advanced planning and specific topic areas. We are taking a hard look at all the courses, determining the fact is, how are they still relevant? Are they up to date? Do we have some holes in which we need to fill in terms of content? And also the fact is it really relevant to the practice of planning from when we go from the classroom and we go back to your installations or garrisons? April is taking the lead on that. We're working very closely with the USACE Learning Center, and we're also working with our stakeholders. We're asking IMCOM and the Air Force to weigh in terms of, hey, what are we missing in here? What should we be teaching? So there's going to be a lot of action on that over the next year. Relationships. A lot of the things that we've talked about already at this point, it comes down to building great relationships, whether it's between contractors and the government or between government agencies. All I will say is that our relationships with IMCOM in the past, shall we say, weren't the best. They have improved tremendously over the past couple of years. In fact, right now, my acting chief, Drew White, is en route to San Antonio. He's going to be meeting up with Randy, and they're going to be visiting both IMCOM and AFCEC in the next couple of days. Drew is the acting chief of installation readiness, so he's down there basically to get familiar with our major stakeholders and, again, build those relationships. And we see that as essential. It also ties into General Spellman's, one of his prime areas of interest is people. So we're looking to try to make sure that we're engaging with our stakeholders, not just simply as another entity, but as people, as to what their needs are and how we can better engage and basically be responsive. The last part is data. Sort of alluded to the fact that we're asking for more data is the fact is that we really want to know what the trends are in the field in terms of what types of projects we're executing, where we're doing them, and dollar value. What was interesting over the past 2 years is that even with COVID and all that, we did about the same dollar amount of work that we did in FY19. It was just that the distribution of the work changed. And as I said, it went more heavily into facility management as opposed to doing planning and programming. But as far as where we're looking for next year, we're not sure because the authorization and appropriations bills are still being discussed on the Hill. We fully anticipate there will be a continuing resolution. So I don't think we'll have full fidelity of where the trends are until probably December, which is when we anticipate we'll finally get our budget. I understand that in the budget process, planning may take a hit. I don't know how much, but I do anticipate that if folks really want the services, whether it's planning, asset management, GIS or whatever, they're going to find the money. I mean, you all know that installations are very good at being able to find money when they need to. But in terms of data, I had alluded to another initiative we're working on now. Through our Planning Support Center at ERDIC, we are working with Fort Carson, Colorado. They have volunteered to take on a pilot project to develop a digital area development plan, where we are plan to be able to import data from our plans, from ePrisms, from GIS, from Builder, to eventually build a digital model, which will allow us, at least the long-term thing, is to basically have the data for the installation virtually, as opposed to being printed and sitting on a shelf, so that when we have to do stationing decisions, when we have to look at force structure, that we can pull that data up and hopefully within a very short, much shorter period of time, determine where there's available capacity, what would be the cost impacts in that. If we do that, we're going to be doing a live demo next month out at Fort Carson to see how the proof of concept in phase 1 is going. Phases 2 and 3 will be sometime next year, but I'm very excited about this because it will probably help answer a lot of our stakeholders' questions in terms of, hey, I need to worry about, I got this unit that wants to be moved. How do I put them in here? And by doing, if we go digital and have all that data there, it's going to make everybody's life a lot easier. And you'll also be able to come up with the number of courses of action a lot quicker than having to sit down and necessarily sketch them out and do numerous data calls. So I'm very excited about that. And like, if anybody has any questions, I'm certainly willing to answer. Over.
That's cool.
We have a question that's unrelated to that, but before I go to that, is there any questions for Ed on what he just presented about the headquarters perspective? Please feel free. If you got any thoughts at all, jump in. I think there might be, is there a hand raised in the audience there?
Nope,
Okay.
they're all nodding their heads.
And
You can see them.
Well, I didn't put them to sleep yet.
is there a way to participate or to view this live demonstration?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet at this point. As I said, we're very early in phase 1. It's proof of concept. When we have something that's available that we can show to a larger audience, we will let you know.
Okay.
That would be great, Ed, thanks.
Oh, it would be great for you because we're going to have to probably also show this to our leadership as well. I anticipate that depending on how this live demo goes, as you know, at this point, the Corps is now engaging with our 4-star commands. I think it started with General Daly wanted updates. So now the other 4-star commanders all want updates from USACE. So I imagine, depending on how this goes, we will probably at least do this as a bullet item with one of the 4 stars. I would suspect that General Garrett might be one of the first because Fort Carson's in his AOR. So, but more to follow.
Very good. Okay, before we move on, we had a question from the audience. Dario Tita is in Poland, and he's asking if you can give any more information specifically about projects being planned in Poland.
Current work projects in Poland. So we've already done area development plans for most of the Poland areas. We are doing some programming work for specific projects. We're also, now that there's a new agreement in place, we're providing more support to the Polish who are leading, doing an update to area development plans in a couple of different different locations that we've already done. Those locations, Waskin, Warklaw are some of the ones that work is coming up. But it's being Polish-led because of the latest agreement for Polish-provided infrastructure. So mostly we're going to be doing support as far as the long-range planning and then doing the programming for the US.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Think back to the presentation.
Yeah. We've really gone through all of the topics or slides with topics. This slide is just kind of showing some of the previous work, and so try to see the transition from in-person, some virtual meetings, just collaboration of teams. So right now, we're still open for any questions on anything that we've discussed today, or we'd love to hear from you, any of your insights on things that you've learned over the last year, or any of your experience as well.
Great, thank you. Charisse, do you have anybody in the audience there that has questions and answers further?
Does anybody have any comments, questions? Share some lessons learned or some best practices, anything like that?
I guess it's nice to see everybody in person.
It's nice to see everyone in person.
I will second that one of these days. So what I will say at this point is that I believe it was Secretary Mattis that says that we have to maintain relevance at the speed of change. And that, I think, at this point has been very well taken over the past year in terms of how that we're doing work. What it is now is also in terms of what we need to do in order to be more responsive to our stakeholders. Particularly the fact is that we're 6 months into a new administration, so we're probably going to see, we've already seen some of the changes that are going to happen. I imagine there will be a lot more as they come along, as the budget gets adjusted and we decide to change strategies at this point. Certainly, I mean, Europe is still going to be very, very important at this point. President has made that very clear when he made his trip over to the NATO summit last month. Europe is still going to be very important to both the U.S. and European interests. So I anticipate we are still going to have plenty of work there. As to the exact locations, I mean, Shenita has pretty much identified at least where some of the trends are. But like I said, just stay tuned for further updates. Other than that, like I said, it's just it's relevance at the speed of change. Over.
We do have, why don't you step over there?
Okay, so
Get on camera.
on this microphone. So just in the interest of industry government engagement, I'd like to make a couple of comments about our lessons learned from the hybrid and the virtual charrettes. So we had a pretty large project at Grafenberg for the ORTC, where we started in August last year with a hybrid charrette. So basically, we had a lot of participation from our team in the US. We had our team on the ground in Germany as well. It was a multi-phase project. We all had to learn a lot, I think, from the core side, from the contractor side. But looking back on it, that first hybrid charrette was really important to get to know people, to build those relationships, to have a real good understanding of where the core was going with the project. It was an extremely fast-track project. We were given very few months in order to get to 35% design, which then had to be certified. Following on from that, we had then our second charrette for the next phase was also hybrid, but all the reviews that we did, we had draft review, final review, corrected final review. All that was done online, and I think there were mainly benefits, certainly from the AE side, not having to travel, having the team able to participate online from the US, also from the government people from the US being able to participate. We had some big scheduling things which we worked through. Some of our meetings were at 9 o'clock in the morning German time, which meant, okay, it wasn't too bad for the East Coast, but some of the West Coast folk, they came in a bit later. So we worked through those issues. I think in many ways it was, once the team had got to know each other, it was actually much more efficient to be working in that environment. There was a lot more focus, I think, in some of those meetings, having these 4-hour chunks, they were very, very productive. So I think generally from our point of view, and speaking in terms of trying to achieve CO2 neutrality, considering flying people across, all those various aspects, I really hope that we'll be able to continue having virtual participants at meetings. I understand exactly what you're saying, Nathan, about getting people around the table, and but in a charrette, when you're all working one plan, people get extremely close. For our meetings, the hybrid meetings, we set up screens around, so when you had people working groups, at least they could look at a screen. It was really cringing to see 4 people hovering around a laptop, trying to keep that 1.5 meters apart. So that didn't really work well. But I think in the future going forward, I hope that we'll be able to use hybrid. We have kickoff meetings going on in the next few weeks, and they're in Grafton there, so the core PM is in Wiesbaden. We're making that a hybrid meeting, so we'll have people there working with the customer, for the core participants, and then a few other people who are interested but wouldn't necessarily travel can also sit on it. So I think it does allow a larger collaboration. So that'd be my suggestion. I hope we can continue to do it in that way without losing the benefits of in-person, but taking advantage of what technology has to offer. And I think just last point, we did a value engineering study, our first value engineering study in the virtual. And that was unthinkable until we had this crisis. I think there's a lot of things that were unthinkable that we've learned to do. So that's my
Thank you, Brian. That was Brian Osborne forward. We are 2 minutes till the top of the hour. I know some people may have other appointments. We can stick around for a few minutes if that's all right.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments? Or have we exhausted all of that?
I have one. Shenita, with some of the trends that you identified, strategic trends, is that causing, or are you anticipating like that driving any, say, changes to how you do things like staffing or, planning, or, when I say scheduling, I guess, or anything that's, you see as operating differently within your group?
I don't see changes to the manning or our structure, but we have already started instituting, kind of improving our business processes over the last year or so as well. We took advantage of doing working collaboratively, teaming. So we updated our templates for scope of work, IGEs. We've updated our standard operating procedures for how we do planning and work in-house, as well as working with AE. So we kind of improved some of our processes and work collaboratively to work out some kinks. So you'll see some of those changes integrated into the scopes of work that you're seeing. So you'll see the new language for design basis threat analysis that's there. You'll see requests for after action reviews. That's been integrated into the scope of work because we were wanting to make sure that we have that engagement at the end of the process so that we can continue to improve. So those things have already been started and implemented, and we'll continue to do those as time allows.
Yeah, I agree. I saw those as improvements. That's great.
Great, thanks. That was interesting. give just a minute to see if anybody else has got additional thoughts or questions, comments.
I'll throw a comment out, just as we're all gearing up to what is traditionally torn season. Do you have any input on, kind of the number that are still pending? How many you think contracting will be able to put through by the end of the year? Everyone here contracting is struggling with the capacity of executing actions. If you have any suggestions of what we might see?
So, we did just have a line item review yesterday, actually, so we had that discussion.
Good timing.
So for most of the torns, they have been, at least, initiated. I think there's, between 6 and 13 that still needs to be, issued. Not all just planning, that's just a mix of, AE actions in general. But that's kind of where we are. I know there was a recent request for a way of doing a torn announcement to let everyone know these are things that's coming. So I did have that discussion and share that a template with Matt Brett, who's the team lead or section chief for the AE design management group that handles a lot of the torns for AEs. So that may be something that you see in the future. I think they're taking a look at that and seeing, you know, how can they incorporate that into their process.
Right?
Okay, so I think we've given everybody a chance to question and comment, and I want to take a moment to thank Charisse, and I think you were assisted by Scott Turrigan and maybe some others, but from my standpoint, I'm sitting here in Arlington, Virginia, and being remote, I mean, I feel like I could hear and participate and be engaged in the entire thing. I can see a lot of you, and this is probably one of the better, you know, from a logistics and technology standpoint, one of the better events that I've participated in. And that's probably attributed to the fact of a lot of these virtual charrettes that have been going on. We've learned a lot, but hopefully, yep, I can see you, Charisse. Hopefully, all of you also feel comfortable with the way things have been conducted here. And one thing we've learned since, you know, going back to March of 2020, you know, Charisse and I kind of scratching our heads going, what are we going to do about meetings going forward? And we decided we're just going to make the best of it. And we went virtual, and we really saw attendance go way up because people were able to join that couldn't physically get to, you know, Clay Concern. And so we see that as a, you know, a win for our you know, just the participation, because of course, the more people participate, the more we all gain out of these events. So we are going to, you know, try to continue to have programs that have a virtual component that allow people to participate to the max extent. And I welcome all of your feedback in any way, manner, letting us know how we can continue to do this better. But Charisse, thank you for the efforts you all made to make this go well in Chandler as well. So, and then I also want to very much thank our guests today. Well, and members, I mean, many of our guests and presenters are also members, but thank very much Ed Gauvreau for also getting up early this morning to join us from Washington area, and Shenita for the efforts that you and your team put into preparing for this, and just, you know, partnering with industry in every aspect every day. Thank you so much. This has really been enjoyable and informative.
Thank you, Margaret. And yeah, I think for our first hybrid event, this did work out. And it was, I want to especially thank Chandler for helping with all of the logistics and the technical, and Lindsay Edwards, if you'd like to come up here. No, all right. So, but I personally wanted to thank our speakers, our presenters, and do the traditional coin for you. So, thank you so much. Very, very appreciated. And Shenita, very nice presentation. Thank you. Nathan, appreciate it. Thanks. All right, you guys, we got the room for a little while longer if you want to have some one-on-one with our presenters. I don't know how long you can stay, but this was great. Thank you so much. We will see you next month.
Thank you. That was very good.
Oh, Ed, I should have given you a virtual coin. I hope we can get you over here, or I can get out there one of these days. Thank you.
Well, let's put it out. Let's make it up at Jetsy next year.
All right. All right, thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Out
right,
here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ed.